After 30 years of marriage, I never imagined hearing such words from my wife. We had built a life together, raised children, and weathered all the challenges that come with growing old. Yet one evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, she said something that shattered my world. "He is younger than you and hot in bed, unlike you," she blurted out, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and defiance. I was taken aback. I had never seen it coming. Our marriage had been steady, perhaps even predictable. Sure, we'd had our ups and downs, but nothing like this. My heart sank as I processed what she had just said. Was she really telling me she had been with someone else? I tried to keep my composure, asking her in a shaky voice, "What do you mean? Who is he?" She looked down, avoiding my gaze. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Jason. He's a co-worker. We've been involved for a few months now." The words felt like a punch in the gut. I could barely breathe, let alone respond. Jason, a younger man, someone who had somehow awakened desires in her that I hadn't been able to touch in years. I wasn't blind. I knew our intimacy had faded, but this was something I could never have prepared for. I had spent so many nights wondering if there was something more I could do to reignite the passion between us. I tried. I really did. But life had a way of wearing us down. The kids, the bills, the routine. And now, in front of me, was the ugly truth. My wife, the woman I had loved and cherished for decades, had found something I could no longer give her in the arms of another man. For a moment, the silence hung heavy between us. Then, she finally looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I needed something more. He made me feel alive again." The anger in me was immediate, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of deep sadness. How had we gotten here? How had we lost each other so completely that my wife sought solace in someone else's arms? I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. I had always considered myself a decent husband, loyal and loving. But here I was, confronting the realization that I had failed her in some way, just as she had failed me. "We need to talk about this," I finally managed to say. "I don't know what this means for us, but we need to figure it out." She nodded, wiping away a tear. "I don't know where we go from here either, but I'm willing to try. I never meant for it to go this far." The truth hung in the air, a painful reminder of how fragile relationships could be. Could we rebuild what had been lost? Or was this the beginning of the end of everything we had known? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the man I had once been was now standing in the ruins of a marriage I had never expected to break. The days that followed were a blur. My mind was constantly racing, trying to understand what had led us here. I found myself replaying every moment in our marriage, every conversation, every quiet gesture, trying to find the cracks that had eventually let everything fall apart. The house felt colder, emptier, despite my wife still being there. She tried to act normal, to go about our routine like nothing had changed, but I could feel the tension, thick as fog, clouding the space between us. The unspoken words hung like a weight, and every time I looked at her, I saw not just the woman I had spent 30 years with, but also the woman who had betrayed me. I decided to talk to her again. A few days had passed since that devastating night, and while we hadn't spoken much about what had happened, it was clear we couldn't avoid it any longer. Sitting across from her in our living room, I searched for the right words. My voice felt strange, foreign, as if I was speaking to a stranger. "Do you love him?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a fragile thread. She didn't answer right away, her eyes darting nervously. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. I don't want to hurt you, but I think I've been lost for a long time." Jason gave me attention, something I didn't realize I was craving. It wasn't just about sex. It was about feeling seen again. My heart clenched, Feeling seen, I couldn't help but wonder how long she had felt invisible to me. Had I been so consumed by life, by responsibilities, by the years passing, that I had neglected her? I had always believed that our love was steady, something that time could only strengthen. But maybe I had taken it for granted. "I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice cracking. "But I don't know how to move past this. I can't just forget what you've done." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, as though she were waiting for some sign of hope. I don't want to lose you either," she whispered. "I made a mistake, and I'm sorry. I don't know if we can fix this, but I want to try." The word try echoed in my mind. It was a small, fragile hope, but it was the only thing we had left. Trying wasn't easy, though. It meant facing the pain, the betrayal, the deep-rooted insecurities that had surfaced in the wake of her affair. It meant questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. I needed answers. Why him? Why now? What did he give you that I couldn't? I asked, needing to understand the depth of her discontent. She paused, her gaze falling to the floor. "It's not about him. It's about me and how I felt invisible. It's not fair to you, but I had become someone I didn't recognize. And when he came along, he made me feel alive again. He made me feel desirable. But I never meant for it to get this far." The more she spoke, the more I realized the depth of her internal struggles, her loneliness. She wasn't blaming me, but I knew I had played a part. I hadn't seen it before, but now I was forced to face it. "I've been trying to understand," I said, my voice quiet. "I really have, but I don't know how to move forward. Can you really come back from this? Can we rebuild what's been broken?" She shook her head slowly, as if she too was uncertain. "I don't know either, but I want to try. I don't want to throw away everything we built." We sat in silence for a while, both of us grappling with the weight of what had happened and the uncertain road ahead. The future felt like a fragile thing, something we both had to hold with care. The thought of rebuilding, of finding our way back to each other, seemed daunting. But somehow, we both knew it was the only way forward. It wasn't going to be easy. There were no guarantees. The trust that had been shattered wasn't something that could be repaired overnight. But in that moment, despite everything, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal. Not because everything would be the same, but because we were both willing to face the pain together, to confront the cracks that had formed in our relationship. It wasn't the end of our story, but it was a turning point. And with time, patience, and a willingness to forgive and rebuild, maybe we could find a way to redefine what we had, something different perhaps, but no less meaningful. The days turned into weeks, and the weight of the conversation lingered in the background of our lives. We didn't talk about the affair every day, but it was always there, a quiet presence. Every glance, every touch, carried the heaviness of what had happened. I couldn't help but wonder if things could ever truly go back to the way they were. We began to go to therapy, the two of us, each session opening new doors of understanding, both painful and enlightening. At first, the conversations were awkward, strained. There were times when I felt like we were strangers, like the intimacy we once shared had been buried beneath layers of hurt and doubt. But as we continued, something started to shift. Slowly, I began to see her, truly see her, in a way I hadn't in years. Therapy forced us to confront the underlying issues in our marriage, the small things that had been neglected over time, the quiet resentment that had festered without either of us acknowledging it. My wife admitted she had felt increasingly disconnected, not just physically, but emotionally. It wasn't just the affair that had driven her to seek someone else. It was the loneliness she had quietly carried with her for so long. She had felt invisible, and that was something I couldn't deny. I had spent so much of my focus on work, on making sure everything was in place for our family, that I had failed to notice the subtle shifts in our connection. Our routines had become so predictable, so comfortable, that I hadn't even realized she was fading from my radar. But in truth, we both had neglected our own needs, both in terms of emotional intimacy and physical closeness. The hardest part was the forgiveness. I knew I had to let go of the anger, the betrayal, if we were ever to move forward, but it was easier said than done. There were nights when I'd lie awake, replaying the images in my mind, her with him. The idea of her touching someone else. The jealousy and pain would surge, and I would feel consumed by it. But with each day, I tried to remind myself that holding on to that pain would only pull us further apart. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live with the hurt, to understand it, and eventually to release it. I started to see small changes in her. She was more present, more open with her feelings. She would reach for my hand during dinner or rest her head on my shoulder while we watched TV. Things we hadn't done in so long. It wasn't the same as before, but it was a start. The spark wasn't reigniting in the same way, but there was a flicker of something we hadn't had in a long time, a connection, an effort to rebuild. There were still moments of doubt. The question of whether we could ever truly heal lingered in the back of my mind, sometimes louder than I wanted to admit. But as weeks turned into months, I realized that healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when the pain would resurface, but there were also moments of progress. We started to talk again, really talk, about the things that mattered, about our hopes for the future, our fears, the parts of ourselves we had hidden from each other for so long. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but the effort was there from both of us. And somewhere along the way, we began to trust each other again, not in the sense that we could simply forget the past, but that we could move forward despite it. The scars would remain, but they didn't have to define us. One night, several months after the affair had come to light, my wife turned to me as we sat on the couch, watching the sunset through our living room window. "I know it's been hard," she said softly, "but thank you for being willing to try. I'm not asking for things to be the way they were. I just want us to be okay again." I smiled, the weight in my chest lightening a little. "I don't know if we'll ever be the way we were," I admitted, "but I think we can find something new, something better, maybe." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I hope so," she whispered, her hand resting on mine. And in that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't about going back to what we once had. It was about moving forward, together, with the lessons we had learned. We weren't perfect, and we would never be the same, but we were still standing side by side, willing to face whatever came next. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something even stronger than before. And in that fragile hope, we found a new beginning, not despite the pain, but because of it.